Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am back to talk about the books that I read in the second half of September. September has been, I don't want to say like the worst period of my reading, but it's definitely been a case of me reading books that are kind of outside of my comfort zone and realising, yeah, I like my comfort zone. I should stay in my comfort zone. My comfort zone is a good place to be. So, you know, look forward to this wrap up. Hey. Actually, the first book that we're going to talk about is one that is very much in my comfort zone and was one that I love and I've read a billion times before and will read a billion times in the future, and that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is actually the third time that I have read this book this year, just to give you any indicator of how much I love this book. But Pride and Prejudice was our book club pick for September for the I Should Have Read That book club, and I was so excited to get to this one because, as I say, it's one of my favourite books of all time. I will link my Jane Austen ranking video down in the description, which will have more in-depth thoughts on Pride and Prejudice. But yes, I was so glad to get to this, and it was so exciting to see other people read this book for the first time, especially Shannon at 155 books. Every single time I got an update from her on where she was in the book, I was like, hee. And I feel like that really is a surefire sign that you love a book, that you're very anxious to see somebody else's thoughts on it. And I have to say, her thoughts did not disappoint me. I had an absolute blast reading this and reading it with other people, and yeah, I'm really excited for next month, which is going to be The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, another book that I have already read. Eventually we will get to a book that I've not read yet, but no, I'm very much excited for it. And now into the other books. Next we have Earthlings by Sayaka Murata, who is the author of Convenience Store Woman, which was one of my favourite books that I read in 2019, I want to say. This is one of the latest offerings from her that has been translated into English from the original, which was in Japanese. Even though I absolutely loved Convenience Store Woman when I read it, I was a little bit hesitant to read this one. And that was because all of the reviews that I had seen from other people said that it was really bizarre, that it really kind of messes with your mind, and I wasn't really sure how much I was up for that. So Earthlings follows the character of Natsuki, who is a bit of an oddball, one might say. It follows her from her youth into adulthood, originally as a child believing that she is an alien who has just been left on Earth to be collected later, and her relationship to her cousin, who kind of indulges her and also says that he believes the same thing. And Natsuki is unnervingly close to her cousin, and it's about how the family dynamic kind of unravels after an incident one night. We're also following Natsuki and her journey through to becoming an adult and how this society treats her, expectations of how she should behave in terms of love and sex and marriage, and how she and her husband do not quite conform to that, and how it's all linked back to how she was treated and how she behaved as a child. And this gets very dark very quickly. This is one that I could not talk about without giving content warnings. There's content warnings for sexual assault, for murder, for incest. I do not consider any of that to be a spoiler. I think it's necessary to know that going in, because otherwise I think some people are going to be really put off this book and will find it really jarring. I found it a really creepy, very unnerving book, and I feel like I was only holding on to this because it was so short and because I knew it was going to wrap up very quickly. And the ending especially just kind of devolves into what is going on? It kind of reminds me of the ending to The Vegetarian, but even weirder. I don't even know if I can recommend this one. I guess if you like reading very twisted, dark things, then maybe give this a go, but otherwise I'm not sure. And I feel like kind of on the same tact as that, we have Pironisi by Suzanna Clarke. This recently won the Women's Prize for Fiction. I kind of guessed that this was going to win, so I'm now on my third year running of guessing correctly the Women's Prize for Fiction winner. Woo! I would say that I should start betting money on it, but I know the second I start betting money on it is the year that I don't get it right. And to be honest with you, it was only the fact that this won the Women's Prize that made me interested, because from last year and what everybody had been saying about what this book was about and how experimental it was, I was giving it a wide berth. It didn't sound like a book that was really for me. And after reading it, yeah, I was right. I should not have picked this book up. I don't understand what this book is. I don't even know how I can review this because I don't know what happened. It's about Pironisi, who lives in this house, and I don't know. Things are happening. We're trying to work out what this house is. Does the house really exist? Are we trapped in the house? Is life outside the house? I don't know. I don't know. And to be honest, I didn't really care enough. I think what this and Earthlings has just cemented for me is that I am a boring conventional person who likes boring conventional books, and I just have to be okay with that. I'm not looking for experimental. No. I'm sorry, life is too short. All I want in life is plots and characters that make sense. Please. And next we are going to a slightly controversial one that I think I'm just gonna have to rip the band-aid right off with this, because I read the second book in the Percy Jackson series, Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters by Riordan. And guys, I'm giving up on this series. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. I was originally going to read this series and do a series of reading vlogs for it, kind of my reaction to reading this book for the first time, to reading this series for the first time, and no. I'm not doing it. I'm sorry. This series is just not for me. And it should be. It absolutely should be. It's, you know, retelling Greek myth, Greek gods in the modern day. I should be all over this, but I'm not. I'm sorry. So the Percy Jackson series is all about the main character, the title character of Percy Jackson, who discovers in the first book that he is a demigod. His mother is a mortal woman, but his father is the Greek god Poseidon. And then he goes to Camp Half-Blood and he starts to train up as a demigod, and then ends up being whisked away on different quests. That convention continues in this book, where he is off looking for his best friend Grover, who has been captured by a Cyclops. At the same time, he's trying to find the Golden Fleece, because that is going to restore Camp Half-Blood to its former glory. In a lot of ways, this should have been like the perfect book in the series for me, because the plot, what happens, is very reminiscent of the Odyssey, which we all know I love. I'm a big fan of Odysseus as a character, and there are lots of winks to Odysseus throughout the book. I was kind of hoping that he might pop up, but no, he didn't. I think what I've really pinpointed as the reason that this series just doesn't really work for me is that I'm not a big fan of the humour of this series. It's very tongue-in-cheek, very irreverent. A lot of the language in it is very much off its time. This series was written around about like 2004, 2005 and onwards, and you can really tell you've got a lot of these Olympian gods and the mythical creatures talking in like naughty slang, which just, I don't know, it doesn't work for me. Like, I'm just waiting for somebody to say, take a chill pill, man. As I said with the last book, it's very, very fast paced, and that just doesn't work for me either. I'm not a fan of a fast paced book. I like slow to medium paced books with lots of character development, and that's another thing that I have an issue with this series, is that I don't feel like I know any of these characters, and I don't particularly like most of them, apart from Chiron. Chiron can stay. I like Chiron. And I was kind of talking about the series and why I wasn't like gelling with it with my housemate, and she mentioned, of course, the fact that this is a children's series and maybe I should give it some leeway because, you know, it's for children and we can't expect children's series to be written to a certain standard. And I fundamentally disagree with that anyway. I don't think anything written for children is inherently less well written or less worthy than any adult book series. But also, one of the reasons I reject that is that I have a pretty good memory of what I was like as a child and the kind of things that I liked when I was a child, and I just know that if I'd read this when I would have been like the intended age of like 11, 12 years old, I would have been irritated by this series then. And I do think, had I read this at 11 or 12 years old, I'd have felt kind of patronized by this book and by the way that it's trying to be very down with the kids. Look, we're using modern slang, kids. Aren't we cool? Aren't we just like you? No. And maybe that's just a marker of what kind of boring kid I was and what kind of boring adult I am now. Fine, I can take that. And like I say, it is a shame because I do love my Greek myth retellings. I was really poised to want to like this series, and especially one of the reasons that I was wanting to read this series now is because one of my favourite podcasts, Potterless, is actually kind of retiring the weekly podcast because the host Mike Schubert is now moving on to doing the Percy Jackson series, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to read this series, was so that I could follow along with that podcast. And now I've read 2 of the books. I don't care enough. I don't want to continue with them, and I feel like I just have to listen to what my heart is telling me, which is that it would just be a waste of my life, would just be a waste of time for me, and I just wouldn't enjoy it. I'm sorry, Percy, it's not you, it's me. We then have another book that I was not overly jazzed about. What is this wrap up? I'm so sorry, guys. I usually like to be all cheerful and wow, this book was amazing, but I don't really have a lot of that this week. And that next book was Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. And I am trying to talk about this in a way that is not going to like mortally offend a lot of my friends on BookTube. And I want to preface this by saying that I like Sally Rooney's work. I really liked Conversations with Friends and Normal People, but I did not like this. I feel like this has been quite a divisive one, and I can see why. A lot of people saying that it's kind of boring, not much happens, and you know, I'd heard that and I thought, well, I love books where nothing happens, but really, nothing happens. You're mainly following 4 different characters, and it's mainly about the friendship between the 2 women of this narrative, one of whom is a young famous author who is from Ireland, who wrote 2 contemporary books that became very, very popular. I wonder who that's about. And her other friend, who she's known since uni, who did not get all of this success but is like whip smart and doesn't know what she's doing with her life. And it's basically following their interactions with 2 men in their lives who they get into romantic entanglements with. The way this book is kind of set out is you have like a chapter of following their lives, and then a chapter which is basically a letter between the 2 girls, partially catching each other up on their lives, but also kind of deep philosophical wisdom that they just happen to have in their brains and wanted to share with the other. And to be honest, I just could not see the purpose. I didn't see how these like big deep philosophical musings fit with the rest of the book. And I feel like in these letters or emails, neither of these 2 characters had a real distinctive voice, which just kind of felt like it was Sally Rooney just dumping an essay in there for the sake of having an essay in there. Classic Sally Rooney, all of these characters are deeply flawed and often deeply annoying, but none so much as Felix. I don't think, at least this year, I've been more annoyed with a fictional character than I was with Felix. Like, I don't even know why he was there. Felix is the romantic interest of Alice, who is the famous novelist. And I suppose she likes him because he challenges her, but to be honest with you, I don't get it. She randomly meets him at a party and then decides that she's going to invite him to Rome with her on book tour. And I could not tell you why, because he is not like charming. He's not a nice guy. He's just very judgmental. He says things to her like, oh, you think a lot of yourself, even though she has never expressed that inclination in the slightest. He just seems very threatened by her, so he just verbally abuses her. I don't really see what we're meant to find appealing about him. The other couple are Eileen and Simon. Eileen has just gotten out of a breakup, so she is kind of relying on Simon, who is kind of her on and off again friends with benefits, and it's whether or not these 2 crazy kids are gonna realize their feelings for each other and actually get together. Eileen's like deep issues with commitment, and honestly I just found it kind of exhausting, really. I actually thought on a sentence level this was really not very good. I'm sorry. There is so much filler in this book. I feel like it needed another edit. Somebody needed to go through this with a red pen and be like, no Sally, get rid of this. One of the very first chapters in this book, we're following Eileen as she goes through her working day, and it is described in like minute detail. Like her opening up, I can't remember if it's Microsoft Office or Excel, she opens up a Microsoft document and we're going through like the minute details of her like backspacing, getting rid of something, adding this thing in, and I'm like, we don't need this. I feel like if it was adding something to describing Eileen's character, then I could understand, but it's not. And the only explanation that I have for this is that maybe Sally Rooney is preemptively thinking about like a film adaptation of this, a television adaptation of this, so she wants to cram in as many details as possible, which is why she goes into like painstaking detail of every item of clothing each person is wearing and how they look and every action that they do. Otherwise, I just can't account for why we need this level of intense detail. That's the only explanation I have, other than her editor just thought, it's Sally Rooney, we can't mess with what she's written, so I guess we're just gonna go with this. But I'm just gonna say it needed edits. So yeah, I didn't like that. I feel like I've been very cursed in the book department this month. But I thought, to round things off, to end things on a positive note, we started with a Jane Austen, we are going to end with a Jane Austen. Because I finally read Teenage Writings by Jane Austen, which is in this Oxford World Classics edition. It is some of Jane Austen's Juvenilia, which features lots of Jane Austen's early writings like The Beautiful Cassandra, Jane Austen's History of England, which I absolutely loved, adored. I've actually done a whole video where I read it out, which will be coming at some point. It might have come out before, it might come out after. I just really enjoyed it as a history lover, so I had to do a video about it. There's also Love and Friendship and Leslie Castle, and I feel like Jane Austen's Juvenilia does not get the credit it deserves. I feel like people just think, oh, it's her early writing, it's not as polished, it's not as good, but it is so sharp and so witty, and you can see Jane Austen exploring ideas and themes and concepts that she does in her later books. And also, it is just hysterically funny. There were moments I was reading this and I was laughing out loud. There's one letter in Leslie Castle where Margaret is writing a letter to Charlotte, and she's talking about how basically every man seems to be attracted to her, and she says, how often I have wished that I possessed as little personal beauty as you do, that my figure were as inelegant, my face as unlovely, and my appearance as unpleasing as yours. But what little chance there is of so desirable an event. And I was just like, oh, the shade of it all. I was just cackling reading this. Just so many characters in here who are nasty, who have so little self-awareness, but who are a delight to read. I think if you're a fan of Lady Susan, then a lot of this juvenilia will really work for you. I don't think I love it on the same level as I do her novels, but I still would say read it. If you like Jane Austen, I would say read this. I don't think it's just something for completionists or for scholars. I think it is a worthwhile part of her writing to read, and it made me happy when I thought that books were no longer giving me joy. So there we go, that is my mess of a wrap up. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I will read better things, hopefully. Fingers crossed. So what have we learnt from this wrap up? I should only ever read books that are in my comfort zone, because clearly that is where my happiness lies. Good lesson for life. Do let me know what you've been reading this month and any of your thoughts on the books that I've mentioned. I would love to hear from you. I hope you are having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.